Thank you for watching the video. This is YouTube Medical University. This video is for those who are struggling to lose subcutaneous fat. There are various dieting methods. You've tried different methods, but none of them last long. And even when you try, your weight doesn't go down at all. In fact, you're gradually gaining weight. Dieting is really tough, isn't it? If you leave fat unchecked, it can accumulate in your liver and cause fatty liver. If that gets worse, it can lead to cirrhosis, and your body may start to swell. In the worst case, it can even be life-threatening. And being overweight can also lead to high blood pressure. And it increases your risk of diabetes. These diseases can cause arteriosclerosis, which raises your risk of future strokes and heart attacks. In order to enjoy traveling and living life your own way in the later years, it's really important to keep your weight under control. Here's some good news for those people. Have you ever heard of fasting? I'm sure you've heard the word fasting before. For example, in Islam, people fast from sunrise to sunset. Muslims don't eat during the day for a whole month. However, actually, a lot of recent research has come out about this fasting, and there are more and more reports suggesting that it might actually make sense for dieting. But first, why did we start eating 3 meals a day? When did we start doing that? At the very least, back in the days when humans lived as hunter-gatherers, 3 meals a day were never guaranteed. In Japan, it wasn't until the late Edo period that people started being able to eat 3 meals a day. When you think about it this way, eating 3 meals a day is actually something that has only happened very recently in the long history of humanity. On the savannah, it's normal for lions to go many days without food when they can't find prey, right? Humans used to be the same way. And did you know that fasting is actually used as a treatment in medicine? For a long time, when people had gastroenteritis, they would rest their intestines. They were advised not to eat solid foods, to reduce the amount they ate compared to usual, and to eat foods that are easy to digest. And I think many of you have experienced this too, right? When you're not feeling well, you don't have much of an appetite, do you? This is actually a natural response of the body. When germs infect our body, our immune system becomes activated to fight them off. Even if we eat during this time, our bodies can't properly absorb the nutrients, and when we eat, our bodies get warmer, right? In other words, we're using energy. When you're not feeling well, you shouldn't use unnecessary energy. That's why our appetite decreases, and our body focuses on fighting off germs. That's the idea. So when we doctors see that a patient has a severe infection, our top priority should be treating that person. When it comes to nutrition, during the acute phase, when the patient is really unwell, the priority of nutrition becomes lower. Many people might think, what are you talking about? You can't get better if you don't eat, right? But that's more important once you've recovered to a certain extent. It's important to eat properly. In other words, it's important to distinguish between times when you should eat and times when you shouldn't. When you think about the structure of the human body, fasting actually makes a lot of sense, but when it comes to things like intermittent fasting, some may wonder why I'm discussing fasting in a video now, even though it gained popularity 2 or 3 years ago. When fasting and intermittent fasting first became popular, there wasn't any solid data available, so I hesitated to share information about it irresponsibly. However, as of 2024, there have been so many studies on fasting that the number of papers is about to reach 1,000. An overview of fasting has also been published in the New England Journal of Medicine, which is the most prestigious medical journal in the world. It contains an overview of fasting and introduces it as an effective intervention method for dieting. In fact, in the United Kingdom, doctors are actually prescribing this fasting method. In other words, as time has passed, various studies have been published. Unlike the questionable health trends you see everywhere, fasting has accumulated a fair amount of data, so I decided to introduce it in this video. And not only that, fasting not only helps with weight loss, but also affects things like blood sugar, blood pressure, and cholesterol levels, all of which are related to metabolic syndrome. It's been pointed out that it may even improve those numbers. So in this video, I'll introduce my top 3 recommended eating methods for losing weight. First, I'll explain the specific effects and methods of fasting. There are other fasting-related eating methods, so watch until the end. At YouTube Medical University, we share videos from a doctor's perspective to help you get healthier starting tomorrow. We share information clearly and responsibly. In hospitals, due to their structure, medical fees are generated by diagnosing and treating patients. Even if we share knowledge to prevent diseases, it rarely benefits the hospital. However, what's important is not only treating diseases, but also detecting them early or resolving issues at the pre-disease stage before they develop. With that in mind, I'm sharing these videos, so I would be happy if you could subscribe to the channel. Now, here are my top 3 recommended diets for losing weight. The first is fasting. Let's take a closer look at fasting. Actually, there are 2 main types of fasting. The one that's commonly known is called petit fasting or short-term fasting. It's a diet method where you fast for 16 hours a day and can eat whatever you want during the remaining 8 hours. Actually, there's another type as well, which is called the 5-2 method. For 5 days you eat normally, and for the remaining 2 days you cut your usual calorie intake by about 75%. There's a method where you drastically restrict your calories only on certain days of the week. In other words, it depends on whether you limit your eating by the hours in a day or by the days in a week. Now let's first look at the effects of the so-called petit fasting. How do you do petit fasting? You can eat whatever you want for 8 hours, but you fast for the remaining 16 hours. For example, you can eat anything you want from 12 noon to 8 p.m, but from 8 p.m. until you wake up and it's 12 noon you fast. During the designated 8 hours, it's basically said that you can eat anything you want, so there's nothing you have to avoid eating. Intermittent fasting is recommended for those who struggle with dieting. By creating periods during the day when you don't eat like this, you can give your intestines a rest, so it's actually thought to be good for your body. Actually, when we eat food, it's digested and absorbed, starting with saliva and the stomach, and in the end, the nutrients are absorbed in the small intestine. The small intestine is actually quite remarkable. It's designed to absorb only nutrients with a small molecular weight, in other words, small particles. Larger molecules like microorganisms, germs, and other impurities can't be absorbed. Those kinds of things can't be absorbed. However, if you're eating constantly for 24 hours, there's less and less time to let your small intestine rest, so what we call cell turnover, the cycle where cells are renewed, gets disrupted, and it's believed that this could lead to something called leaky gut syndrome. So what exactly is leaky gut syndrome? Well, the small intestine is made up of these tiny folds, and each of these folds is made up of the cells of the small intestine. When holes form in these cells, substances that shouldn't normally be absorbed, it's believed that when impurities or microorganisms are absorbed, inflammation occurs and harms the body. That's why, by doing intermittent fasting, you can let your intestines rest for 2/3 of the day. That's why this kind of intermittent fasting is said to be good for your body. So, what kind of weight loss effects does this intermittent fasting have? There was a study that followed 139 obese adults for a year to observe the results. These people were divided into a group that did intermittent fasting and a group that ate regular meals with calorie restriction. Surprisingly, both groups ended up losing about the same amount of weight. In other words, simply restricting calories. Intermittent fasting has the same effect as a regular calorie-restricted diet. Intermittent fasting is easy to understand because it simply limits the time you can eat. During eating hours, you can eat what you want. For those who prefer clear eating windows over all-day restrictions, intermittent fasting is effective, so I recommend trying it. Next, instead of intermittent fasting, there's a method called the 5-2 diet where you divide the week into 5 days of eating and 2 days of fasting. Actually, there is more research available on the 5-2 diet than on intermittent fasting. For example, there is a study involving 32 people. They divided the participants into 2 groups. One group practiced alternate day fasting, meaning they fasted every other day, and the other group ate normally. They had both groups continue these eating patterns for 3 months. As a result, the people who practiced alternate day fasting every other day lost an average of 5.2 kilograms. That makes sense, right? When you compare people who fasted with those who ate normally, there was about a 5.2 kilogram difference. That's the amount they lost in just 3 months, so that's quite a lot, isn't it? Alternate day fasting doesn't mean you eat nothing every other day. Instead, every other day you limit your calorie intake to 25% of your normal amount, in other words, just a quarter. So, even if you only work hard on your diet every other day, you can still see weight loss effects. For those who find it easier to have a cycle of 1 day as a reward and 1 day working hard, I think this method can also be recommended. And for people who practiced fasting on alternate days like this, there are reports that not only did their hemoglobin A1C, which is a measure of blood sugar, decrease, but also their body fat and visceral fat went down, not just their weight. However, whether it will definitely lower the average blood sugar value, known as hemoglobin A1C, still needs more reliable evidence in the future. Since the results show that large-scale studies are still needed, it might be a bit premature to assume that fasting will definitely improve your blood sugar and to push yourself hard for that reason. What do you think? In other words, to sum up, fasting means creating periods of time or days when you don't eat. I think the main effect is that you lose weight because your total calorie intake decreases. However, one of the benefits of fasting is that on the days when you can eat whatever you want. I think the advantage is that there are no restrictions on what you can eat, so please consider which diet method suits you best. And there's one thing I really want you to remember. There are some precautions with this fasting method. By skipping breakfast, there is research data showing that the risk of stroke increases, so I don't really recommend skipping breakfast as a form of fasting. It's better to have a good breakfast and lunch, then eat less at dinner. I think that's much more reasonable. At night, due to hormone balance, your blood sugar tends to rise more easily, and since you're basically just going to sleep, you don't really use up much sugar, so it's less likely you'll get low blood sugar. For these reasons, even when fasting, I recommend that you always eat breakfast. And for those who have diabetes and are taking medication or using insulin, please be careful. If you skip meals while fasting, your medication could lower your blood sugar and put you at risk of hypoglycemia. Therefore, if you have diabetes and are considering fasting, please consult your primary doctor to make sure it is safe for you. Also, you need to be careful not to have too high expectations for fasting. Some studies suggest that fasting may have anti-cancer effects, meaning it could suppress cancer. There are indeed some studies like that. However, just one study is not enough to say that you should definitely do fasting, so it doesn't have that much impact or credibility. So when you hear extreme and appealing claims like fasting will rejuvenate your genes or cure cancer, I think you need to be careful about those claims. Fasting should be considered just one method for weight loss. Just remember that fasting is only effective as one method for weight loss. So, what about this diet method? Or what about this kind of fasting? If you want to consult about it, YouTube Medical University holds regular live streams every Tuesday at 9 post-meridian. We reflect on health together, so if you're interested, we hope to see you there. Now first, let's review fasting. In the first place, eating 3 meals a day has only been around for a short period in human history. In fact, hunger might actually be the best medicine for humans. By practicing fasting, compared to a group that simply restricted calories, there are data showing that the same level of weight loss can be seen and that body fat and visceral fat decrease. If you want to structure your diet by managing meal times and are serious about weight loss, give it a try. However, skipping breakfast. And I advise people with diabetes to be careful. Now next, in addition to this fasting, I want you to be mindful of the following points. I will introduce 2 dietary methods for losing weight. The second of the 3 recommended dietary methods for weight loss is this one. It's drinking water. Saying that drinking water alone will make you lose weight is an exaggeration, but drinking water is still very important. Fasting doesn't mean you can't have fluids. Even during fasting, it's okay to drink water. In fact, if you don't take in fluids, you could become dehydrated. Even if you're active, you might not feel energetic, and if you become severely dehydrated, your blood pressure can drop. You might feel dizzy, and it can put a strain on your kidneys. And as I mentioned earlier, skipping breakfast increases the risk of stroke, and it's actually known that dehydration can also raise the risk of stroke, so even if you skip a meal, make sure to drink plenty of fluids. And drinking water is actually considered effective for not overeating as well. This is the way I recommend taking in water. Not right before breakfast, but 30 minutes before eating breakfast. Try to drink about 2 glasses of water. If 2 glasses feel too much for you, even 1 glass is fine. There is data showing that people who drank 2 glasses of water 30 minutes before breakfast lost more weight compared to those who didn't. That makes sense, doesn't it? By drinking water beforehand, you can prevent overeating. And when you're hungry, you tend to eat faster, and before you know it, your blood sugar spikes all at once. You get sleepy, and then you can't get anything done afterward, right? So I think drinking water beforehand is effective for preventing overeating and slowing down the speed at which you eat. And what I want you to be careful about at this time is to make sure it's water. If you drink juice, even juice that's just a little sweet often contains the equivalent of many sugar cubes dissolved in it. And people with diabetes need to be especially careful, because if you drink juice, your blood sugar will rise rapidly, and when your blood sugar rises, your kidneys will work hard to try to produce more urine. When that happens, dehydration gets worse, and as you get more dehydrated, you get thirstier, so you drink more juice, which raises your blood sugar even more, leading to more urination, and it becomes a vicious cycle. If you're trying to diet, I recommend that if you usually drink juice, just switching to water can make a big difference, so please try to be mindful of that. The third recommended diet method is this: veggie first. I think this is also effective when you're fasting. When you're doing intermittent fasting, I think when it's finally time to eat, you tend to want to eat a lot of greasy or high-calorie foods all at once. Actually, you need to be careful about this. Everyone, have you heard of the term blood sugar spike? When we eat a large amount of food all at once, our blood sugar rises rapidly, and when our blood sugar rises quickly, our body gets surprised and releases a hormone called insulin. It secretes a hormone that lowers blood sugar. Then this time your blood sugar drops rapidly, and if you look at it on a graph, it looks like a spike in your blood sugar levels. This is called a blood sugar spike. Actually, not only having high blood sugar, but the spike itself can cause arteriosclerosis. In other words, it makes your blood vessels harden and more likely to get clogged. It's believed that this can promote and worsen the condition. That's why it's important to prevent it, and that's where Veg First is getting attention. Studies on this have also been done in Japan. There are studies comparing a group that eats carbohydrates first and a group that eats vegetables first, and they found that the group that eats vegetables first has a harder time raising their blood sugar levels. Vegetables contain dietary fiber, and this dietary fiber isn't digested and reaches the intestines. It acts like a cushion during digestion. If you eat vegetables first and let them line your stomach, the absorption of carbohydrates and proteins slows down, making it harder for your blood sugar levels to rise. I think that's an easy way to understand it. If carbohydrates are absorbed rapidly, a lot of sugar floats around in your blood. That's what it means when your blood sugar level rises. Recently, it's been getting attention that sugar in the blood sticking to proteins might actually be what causes arteriosclerosis. The substance formed when sugar and protein stick together is called advanced glycation end products or advanced glycation end products. It's a complicated term, so you don't have to remember it, but this substance is actually believed to damage the walls of blood vessels and promote arteriosclerosis. The importance of eating vegetables first. I hope you were able to understand that. However, please pay attention to one thing here, everyone. In order to prevent a rapid rise in blood sugar and avoid a blood sugar spike, it's not enough to just eat vegetables first. You also need to be mindful of two other things. The first is to chew your rice thoroughly. In the earlier study, the group that practiced veggie first had a rule to chew each bite 20 times. By chewing thoroughly, the time you spend eating increases, which also helps slow down the rise in blood sugar. So, to prevent blood sugar spikes, make sure to take your time and chew well. And the second condition is choosing foods with a low glycemic index value. Glycemic index value might sound like a complicated term, but it's actually simple. The glycemic index value indicates how quickly your blood sugar level rises after eating a meal. You need to be careful with white carbohydrates as they have a high glycemic index value, things like udon, white rice, and bread. On the other hand, foods with a low glycemic index value tend to be brownish or darker in color, not white carbohydrates like soba noodles or brown rice. And also bread made from whole grains. Even if you eat these carbohydrates, your blood sugar levels won't rise as much. Brown rice in particular is highly recommended because it's considered a complete food rich in protein and vitamins. In fact, some of my patients who come to my clinic have experienced a remarkable drop in their hemoglobin A1C, which is a measure of blood sugar, just by switching from white rice to brown rice. Also, I basically try to eat vegetables first and make sure to chew my rice thoroughly. And sometimes I make a conscious effort to choose brown rice. I encourage all of you to try eating vegetables first, not only to prevent future arteriosclerosis, but also to avoid gaining weight. As I've emphasized, eating vegetables first is very important to prevent blood sugar spikes, and it's also important to choose foods with a low glycemic index value. And the very fact that your blood sugar level rises is said to increase the risk of diabetes, so I'd like to introduce some products that I personally eat and especially recommend for people who have diabetes or want to avoid getting it. That's this low-carb soybean noodle. As the name suggests, it's low in carbohydrates and made from soybeans. Not only does it have a low glycemic index value, but it's also low in carbohydrates and mostly protein. In other words, it's an amazing noodle that's a great source for building muscle. I've actually tried it myself. It was just as good as regular soba. In fact, I felt like it kept me full even longer than regular soba. Recently, there have been more and more products on the market being advertised as low carb. But if you actually look at the nutrition labels, you'll often find that some of them still contain around 40 grams of carbohydrates. So make sure to check the nutrition labels carefully. Let's compare these low-carb soybean noodles with other carbohydrates. White rice contains 36.8 grams of carbohydrates per 100 grams. And as I mentioned earlier, soba noodles, which have a low glycemic index value, contain 27 grams of carbohydrates per 100 grams. As for udon, it's said to contain 20.8 grams per 100 grams. And what's more, the ones I just mentioned. This low-carb soybean noodle contains only 1 gram. Rather than having some special ingredient that makes you lose weight, it's simply that it clearly has fewer carbohydrates, so you lose weight, and that's why it's less likely to worsen diabetes. It's a pretty straightforward logic. And the special thing about this food is that it doesn't contain synthetic coloring or artificial sweeteners. They don't use any of those at all, and it's made from domestically produced soybeans, which is also reassuring. And since it contains protein instead of carbohydrates, the protein serves as a source for building muscle. And if you can build more muscle, your metabolism will increase, making it even easier to lose weight. For these reasons, replacing your usual staple foods with this product. Just by switching to these low-carb soybean noodles, you can lose weight, make your body more prone to slimming down, and it will also help stabilize diabetes control. I ate it as regular soba, but you can also use it for ramen, yakisoba, pasta, and even in soups. Original recipes for each season are also introduced, so please check the description box for more details. You can also purchase it online. This clearly has weight loss benefits you can expect. It has obvious advantages over taking diet supplements, so I wanted to introduce it to you. How was it? Let's review what we've covered so far. As recommended eating habits for losing weight, first, drinking water, and third, I recommended eating vegetables first. Drink 2 glasses of water 30 minutes before eating your meal. And for eating vegetables first, it's not just about starting with vegetables, but also making sure to chew them thoroughly. And I also talked about choosing foods with a low glycemic index. Besides that, there are actually quite a few other dietary points you should pay attention to. I previously released a video on breakfast that can shorten your lifespan. If you're interested, check it out in the description box. Now let me share something important. I've recommended things like fasting, eating vegetables, chewing well, and choosing foods with a low glycemic index. But on the other hand, what I don't want you to forget is to enjoy your meals. If you keep holding back to stay healthy but end up unhappy, it doesn't mean much. Enjoying good food and feeling happy matters too. And sharing mealtime with someone important to you. I hope you don't take this joy lightly, even if you gain a little weight, as long as you're happy. Isn't that okay? That kind of thinking is important too. On the other hand, if you think it's okay to eat anything as long as you're happy and end up gaining too much weight, when you get older, you might find yourself facing unexpected illnesses and unable to live as energetically as you'd like. So it's important not to go overboard with health and self-restraint, but also to cherish those occasional moments of happiness. I think this kind of balance is important, and without occasional rewards, stress can build up. It might be mentally tough as well. Please share in the comments what kind of rewards you usually give yourself, or if you have any eating habits that helped you lose weight. And if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. It really motivates me to make the next one. Also, I'd appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new videos. Well then, see you in the next video.